High above a sea of clouds, the city of Asterhold floated in cold silver light, and its towers glowed with blue fire from the great skyforge at the center. Metal bridges crossed the open air, frost clung to every rail, and wind moved through the streets like a warning. The people of Asterhold had lived under the protection of the ancient storm seal for hundreds of years, and that seal kept the wild sky away, kept the city steady, and kept the elemental clans from tearing one another apart. But now the seal was failing, the skyforge was shaking, and a crimson ritual had already begun deep under the city. If the ritual reached the heart of the forge, the seal would break, the floating city would lose its shield, and elemental chaos would spill into the world below. Kael was the only one who could stop it, even though many believed he was the reason it had started. Kael was a 17-year-old boy with black hair, gray eyes, and a calm face that hid a storm of fear and anger. He wore a dark coat with silver trims, leather gloves, and a belt full of rune stones that helped him focus his power. Kael was born with control over fire, ice, lightning, gravity, and void, a rare and forbidden gift that no clan wanted to admit was real. The Fire clan wanted his flame. The Ice clan feared his cold. The Lightning clan wanted to study him. The Gravity clan wanted to use him as a weapon. The void, however, was the part that scared everyone because it made walls bend, sound vanish, and space itself feel wrong. Kael did not want power for praise or control. He only wanted enough strength to protect the city and understand why his mother had hidden him from the clans when he was a child. That question had followed him for years, and tonight it mattered more than ever. The alarm bells rang through Asterhold as the first outer gate shattered under a burst of red light. At the same time, the 4 clan leaders gathered in the forge hall and started shouting over one another, each blaming the others for the attack. Lily, a sharp young woman with blonde hair, green eyes, and a red scholar robe, tried to calm them while she carried scrolls that explained the old seal. She was the city historian, and she knew the seal was not just a lock. It was a living balance built from the first agreement between the clans. Max, a broad young man with brown hair, blue eyes, and a gray guard uniform, stood beside the forge door with a shield in his hands. He was loyal to the city and wanted only to keep people safe, even if it meant standing against his own clan elders. Then Victor arrived, a thin man with white hair, cold eyes, and a black ritual robe lined with red thread. He was the high priest of the Crimson Rite, and his motive was simple and terrible. He believed the clans had weakened the world by sharing power, and he wanted to shatter the old balance so one true force could rule everything. He had started the ritual to awaken the living void beneath the city, because he thought the void would erase all weak magic and leave only his chosen order behind. Kael reached the lower forge levels with Lily and Max at his side, while the city above began to groan and tilt. The path forward passed through frost-covered ruins from an older age of the city, broken halls where old clan symbols were carved into ice and stone. Victor had sent elemental guards and twisted mage constructs to block every way in, and each one carried a different power, as if the clans themselves had been forced into a war. Kael burned through one line with fire, froze a second line with a sweep of ice, and broke the floor under a third with a heavy pull of gravity that slammed them aside without lasting harm. He did not fight like a simple warrior. He moved like a storm with a human shape, but every time he used the void, the air went silent and the shadows deepened, as if the city itself feared him. Lily noticed this, and she finally told him the truth she had hidden for years. His mother had once been the seal keeper, and she had placed a piece of the storm seal inside Kael when he was a child, because she knew only a person born between the elements could mend what others had broken. Kael was not an accident. He was a K. That truth hit him hard, but the worst shock came only moments later. Deep in the ruins, they found a chamber of mirrors made from black crystal, and in the center stood the living void, chained in crimson light. It was not just a monster. It was the broken heart of the storm seal, given shape by Victor's ritual. It spoke in a low voice that sounded like empty wind, and it revealed that Victor had not created the catastrophe alone. One of the clan leaders had secretly fed him seal fragments for years, hoping to gain control of the forge after the seal fell. The traitor was Damien, leader of the Lightning clan, a proud man with blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and a gold battle coat. Damien had pretended to defend the city, but he wanted the storm seal destroyed because he believed the Lightning clan deserved to command the Skyforge alone. This betrayal explained why the defenses had been failing from the start. The city was not collapsing by accident, it was being cut open from within. The chamber exploded into motion. Damien ordered his clan fighters to seize the forge core. Victor began the final chant, and the living void started pulling stone, fire, and light into itself. Kael stood between all of them and saw the real choice before him. If he fought only with one element, he would lose. If he tried to defeat everyone by force, the void would only grow stronger. So he did the one thing no clan had done in generations. He blended the 5 powers together. Fire gave him speed, ice gave him shape, lightning gave him force, gravity gave him control, and void let him touch the broken space around the seal without being torn apart. He moved through the chamber with impossible balance, sending Damien back with a surge of lightning and pushing Victor away with a gravity burst that shattered the ritual circle. Then he reached the living void not with hate but with steady hands and a clear mind. It fought him by showing every fear he had ever carried, every day he had felt unwanted, and every voice that said he was dangerous. Kael nearly broke under that pressure, but Lily shouted from the side chamber. Max held the line against the fighters, and Kael remembered his mother, who had trusted him before anyone else did. He opened his hands, pulled the storm seal fragments together, and forced his 5 powers into one spinning core of light and shadow. The void screamed without sound, the crimson ritual cracked apart, and the chamber began to tremble as the seal started to reform. For a moment, the city above seemed to hold its breath. The Skyforge stopped shaking, and the frost on the ruins melted into clear water that ran down the old stone. Victor was driven back into the shadows of the lower halls, his ritual ruined, while Damien stood frozen in shock, finally seeing that his greed had almost destroyed the city he claimed to defend. The elemental clans did not become friends in that instant because trust does not grow that fast, but they did see the truth. The seal had always depended on balance, and balance could not survive if one clan tried to stand above the others. Kael, still trembling from the strain, understood something new as well. His power was not only a burden, it was a bridge. It could join what fear had split apart if he used it with care instead of rage. Lily promised to guide him through the old records. Max stayed at his side as a true guard and friend, and the broken city began the hard work of healing. Yet far below, in the deepest dark under Asterhold, the living void was not fully gone. It had only been pushed back, and its whisper still moved through the cracks of the world. Kael looked down into that darkness and knew the battle had only begun because the ancient storm seal had been repaired, but the force that tried to break it had already learned his name. Asterhold slept under a gray dawn, and its broken towers stood like tired giants. Dust still drifted through the streets, and fresh stone covered old cracks where the city had nearly split apart. People moved slowly through the market lanes, carrying boards, water, rope, and lamps because every hand was needed now. Kael stood on a high terrace above the lower district, and he watched all of it with tired eyes. He was the young protector who had helped repair the ancient storm seal, and he wanted one simple thing more than anything else now. He wanted the city to heal and stay safe. Max stood beside him like a steady wall, a broad man with black hair, a worn cloak, and a calm face that hid deep worry. Max was Kael light in the dark, a true guard and friend who wanted to keep Kael alive long enough to understand the full truth. Below them, in the deep stone under the city, the living void still breathed through broken cracks, and that was the heart of the problem. It had been pushed back by the seal, but it had not been removed, and if it found another way up, Asterhold would lose everything again. The first warning came from the record hall. Leela, a sharp young woman with red hair and ink stains on her sleeves, rushed in with a stack of old scrolls tied by blue cord. She was the city historian, and she cared about the past because she believed the past could save the future. Beside her came Jonah, a quiet older man with gray hair, round glasses, and careful hands, who had spent his whole life copying old maps and warnings. He wanted the truth more than comfort, and that made him matter now. Leela spread the pages across a table and pointed to a line written in fading black ink. Long ago, the seal had not been made to trap a beast. It had been made to trap a mind that lived in darkness and learned through fear. The writers called it the living void because it could listen, wait, and shape itself around the weakness of others. Kael read the words and felt cold spread through his chest because the records also said the void always sought a name. Once it knew a person's name, it could whisper to that person in waking hours and in dreams, and that made the person easier to mislead. That was why the old guardians had hidden their names, broken their seals, and lived apart from the world. The danger was not only attack, the danger was influence. If the void got into one guard, one builder, or one child, it could spread doubt through the whole city. Kael did not want to accept that at first because the city had already suffered so much. He wanted to believe the repaired seal was enough, and he wanted to rest for one single day without hearing another warning. But then the whispers began again. They came at night through the floorboards, through the narrow alleys, and through the quiet spaces between hammer strikes in the rebuilding yards. Small things went wrong first. Lanterns went dark at the same time. Fresh stone cracked in neat lines. Workers forgot where they had set their tools. A little boy named Eli, a brave child with sandy blonde hair, said he heard a voice calling from the storm drains. His mother, Nora, a gentle woman with brown hair and tired hands, said Eli had been afraid all night because the voice knew his favorite song. That was the moment Kael realized the enemy was not testing the city by force anymore. It was learning how people lived, what they loved, and what could frighten them most. Max moved faster after that, checking doors, escorting workers, and standing near Kael whenever the whisper grew stronger. He had never pretended to be fearless, but he refused to leave his friend alone. His loyalty mattered because it gave Kael something solid to hold onto when the dark began to press in from every side. Soon the truth became even worse. Jonah found a hidden page tucked inside a broken ledger, and it held a map of the storm seal chambers under the city. In one corner, there was a seal mark that matched Kael's own hand sign, but the mark had been scratched through and rewritten by someone unknown. Leela saw the change first, and her face turned pale. Someone had been inside the old records before them. Someone had been feeding the void information about the seal, the guards, and the weak points in the stone. That was the twist that changed everything, because the threat was not only below the city anymore. It had help. Kael asked who could have done such a thing, and Jonah pointed to the old maintenance notes with a shaking finger. The notes were signed by a city inspector named Victor, a smooth man with black hair who always smiled too easily and always wanted access to sealed places. He said he wanted to protect the city, but the records showed a different motive. Victor had been paid in secret by a hidden cult of void worshippers who believed the living void would remake the world into something silent and obedient. They did not fear the dark. They wanted to serve it because they thought power would rise from the ruin. Kael felt anger rise in him, but Max put a hand on his shoulder and told him to breathe. They could not win by rage alone. They needed proof, timing, and a plan. So Kael went below with Max, Leela, and 2 repair crews led by a stern woman named Hazel, who had dark hair, a steel helmet, and a loud voice that kept workers moving. Hazel wanted the tunnels secured before the next storm cycle, because rain made the lower walls weaker and the void whispers stronger. As they climbed down into the Undercity, the air became wet and cold, and every torch seemed smaller than before. The living void had changed the tunnels. Thin black veins now moved through the stone like veins under skin, and each one pulsed when Kael stepped closer. That was when he understood the enemy had learned his name in a very real way. The void did not shout it, it whispered it softly, almost kindly, like a friend trying to get close. It told him he was late. It told him the city had already chosen the wrong side. It told him Max would fail him. Kael nearly stopped walking because those words were aimed with cruel skill. They were not random fear. They were shaped to split trust. Max saw Kael falter and stepped in front of him without a word. That simple move broke the spell of the moment. Kael realized then that the void could learn names, but it still could not understand loyalty. It could mimic voices, but it could not create the bond between 2 people who chose each other freely. At the deepest chamber, they found the reason the whispers had grown stronger. The repaired seal had held, but one side of it had been left with a hidden gap, no wider than a finger. Through that gap, the void had stretched itself like smoke, testing the edge of the world. In the chamber beside it stood Victor, no longer smiling, his face tight with fear and greed. He had brought a small relic stolen from the record hall, a black stone ring that the cult believed could guide the void upward in careful steps. Victor did not want the city destroyed at once. He wanted control. He wanted the living void to rise enough to frighten the council so he could sell himself as the only man able to manage it. His plan made ugly sense, and that made it even more dangerous. Kael saw it all in one sharp moment. Victor had traded the city for power, and the void had let him think he was in control. Hazel ordered the crew back. Leela shouted for the seal tools. Max moved to protect Kael from the first surge of dark wind that burst from the gap. The chamber shook, dust filled the air, and the void pushed hard against the stone barrier, trying to open the weakness before anyone could close it. Kael stepped forward before fear could freeze him. He raised the storm mark that had helped repair the seal, and he spoke the name of the city with clear force. Not because the void needed a name to learn, but because people needed to hear who they were fighting for. The chamber answered with a deep rumble, and the old runes along the walls began to glow again. Leela handed Kael the missing record page, and Jonah called out the old pattern for locking the seal from the inside. Max held the line beside him while Hazel and the repair crew jammed fresh stone into the gap. Victor tried to run, but the dark behind him recoiled first, as if it no longer trusted the man who had tried to use it. That moment gave Kael the opening he needed. He drove the storm mark into the seal groove, and the chamber flashed with cold white light. The living void screamed without a mouth, then slammed backward into the deep dark below. The gap closed, the black veins stopped moving. Victor was left trapped in the lightless corner, terrified and silent, while the crew held him in place for the city guards. The enemy had not been destroyed, but it had been driven back again, and this time everyone saw that it could learn, plan, and use people. When Kael climbed back toward the surface, he was not the same boy who had first looked into the darkness. He understood now that courage was not only about standing alone. It was about trusting others, protecting their names, and refusing to let fear speak for them. Above him, Asterhold still had broken walls, tired hands, and long days ahead, but the city also had something stronger now. It had proof that the dark could be resisted. Yet far below, beyond the repaired seal, the living void remained awake, and before the night ended, it sent one last whisper through the stone, one name carried softly into the crack of the world, and Kael heard it clearly. Asterhold still felt wounded when the first pale light returned to its broken terraces. The underground city had quiet lanes, cracked stone steps, and repair crews moving through the dust with tired hands and careful eyes. Lanterns hung from bent poles, and their glow touched damaged walls, fallen beams, and old carvings that had survived many hard years. The air was cold, damp, and full of worry, because everyone in the city now knew the truth. The danger was not gone. The ancient storm seal had held, but the living void below it was still awake, still watching, and still searching for a path back into the world above. Kael stood near the repaired chamber entrance with his dark cloak hanging close around him, and his sharp, tired eyes kept turning toward the stone floor as if he could feel the whisper still moving there. He was young, but he had already become the one people looked to when fear spread. He wanted to protect the city, and he wanted to keep the names of the lost from being twisted by lies. Max stayed at his side, tall and broad, with black hair, a heavy guard cloak, and the steady posture of a man who had learned how to protect others without needing praise. He wanted the city to stay safe, and he trusted action more than speeches. Layla, a woman with red hair, ink stains on her sleeves, and a satchel of scrolls, moved through the chamber with quick, focused steps. She wanted answers, and she believed the old records could still speak if someone was brave enough to listen. Jonah, an older man with gray hair, round glasses, and careful hands, carried rolled maps and copied notes. He wanted order, memory, and truth because he knew that cities did not survive by strength alone. Eli, a small boy with sandy blonde hair and a worried face, held close to Nora, a woman with brown hair, a gentle face, and a weary worker dress. Eli wanted the nightmare to end, while Nora wanted him to keep his innocence for as long as possible. High above, Hazel, a strong woman with dark hair, a steel helmet, and heavy repair gear, directed crews to brace the upper tunnels and shore up the broken walls. She wanted the city to keep standing, no matter how much effort it took. And somewhere deeper in the city, Victor, a man with black hair, a smooth face, sharp eyes, and a neat inspector coat with a silver clasp, watched all of them with controlled calm. He said he wanted safety for Asterhold, but his cold gaze told another story, one that Kael did not yet fully understand. The problem was now clear to everyone. If the void found a crack in the seal, it could spread fear again, break the city apart, and turn neighbor against neighbor before any open attack ever began. By midday, the great chamber beneath Asterhold filled with voices, maps, and old stone dust. Leela spread ancient scrolls across a wide table and pointed at a circle of faded marks near the center of the seal. She explained that the storm seal had never been meant to work alone. It was only one part of a larger pattern built by the first protectors of Asterhold to keep a living hunger buried under the city. Jonah added that the old records described a warning system hidden in the lower archives, a system that could reveal when the seal was being tested from below. Kael listened closely because the whispers from the previous night still sat in his mind like a cold stone. He had heard one name carried softly through the crack in the world. He had not said it aloud yet because he did not want fear to grow before he knew what it meant. Max noticed that silence and gave Kael a small nod, as if to say he was ready when the time came. Then Eli slipped out from behind Nora and tugged on Kael's sleeve. The boy looked up with wide eyes and said he had seen Victor near the lower storage tunnels during the night, alone, holding something dark in his hand. Nora froze at that because Victor had been speaking kindly to workers and promising quick repairs, and she had believed him. Kael bent down and asked Eli to show exactly where he had stood. The child pointed with a shaking finger, and that small moment changed everything. The group went to the lower storage passage, where old crates had been moved aside and dust still lay in clean lines on the floor. There, tucked beneath a broken shelf, Kael found a small black stone ring. It was smooth, heavy, and carved with tiny marks that seemed to pull the light inward instead of reflecting it. Leela stared at it and whispered that the ring was not part of the storm seal at all. Jonah recognized the marks from a damaged page in the archive and said the ring was a guiding relic, made to help someone listen to the living void and steer its whispers toward a chosen place. No one spoke for a moment after that. The meaning was simple and terrible. Someone inside Asterhold had been helping the void listen, and the whispers were not random at all. They had a path, they had a guide. And the city had an enemy wearing the face of order. Kael carried the black stone ring back to the chamber, and the air around him felt colder with every step. The moment Victor saw the relic, his smooth face changed for the first time. It was small, but Kael caught it. A tightening around the eyes, a quick shift of the jaw. A man who had carefully hidden himself had just been seen by the one person he could not fool. Victor raised his hands and spoke in a calm voice, saying the ring had likely been taken from forgotten storage and mistaken for something dangerous. He claimed he had been trying to catalog it for safety, but his explanation collapsed under simple questions. Why was he in the lower tunnels at night? Why had Eli seen him there? Why had the ring been hidden instead of logged? Victor then let the mask slip a little more. He said the city was weak, that the old rules had failed, and that Asterhold needed a stronger hand, one willing to use the void rather than fear it. He did not speak like a man serving the city. He spoke like a man who wanted to control it. His motive was now clear. Victor believed the city was already broken, and he wanted power before chaos could take it from him. He thought the living void could be directed, and that if he held the right relics, he would become the only person able to command what came next. The thought was dangerous because the void was not a tool. It was a living force that fed on fear, and every whisper it sent made people less certain of what was real. That was why the first seals had been built so carefully. The old protectors knew that once fear began guiding choices, the city would fall apart from the inside, even before the walls broke. Max stepped in front of Kael, and Hazel climbed down from the repair level with 2 guards close behind her. She had already heard enough from the lower crews to understand that Victor had been moving materials without permission. She looked at him with hard eyes and demanded the truth. Victor answered with a bitter laugh and said truth had never kept anyone safe. Then he tried to force his way toward the archive stairs, but Max blocked him, and the chamber erupted into chaos as guards and workers rushed back from every side. No blades were drawn to harm, but the clash of bodies, shields, and heavy boots sent Victor driving backward through the dust. He snapped a final command into the dark ring, and the living void answered at once. Thin black tendrils surged through the cracks in the chamber floor, and dim red glints burned inside the darkness as if something deep below had opened one eye. Stone groaned. Lanterns trembled. Eli cried out. Nora pulled him close. Leela shielded the scrolls with her body. Kael felt the whisper return, louder now, and this time it carried a name with perfect clarity. Victor smiled at that sound because he knew the void had recognized the one person who still stood in its way. The floor of the chamber shook, and a line of pale blue light flashed through the repaired seal as the storm runes woke in response. Kael did not run. He remembered the words from the earlier fight, the truth that had saved him then, and he understood it more fully now. Trust was not weakness. Trust was the reason the city still stood. He looked at Max, and Max answered by moving beside him without a word. He looked at Leela, and she opened the scrolls to the right page as if she had been waiting for this moment. He looked at Jonah, and the older man quickly found the missing line in the archive copy, the part that explained how the ring could be broken without shattering the seal. Then Kael looked at Hazel, who shouted for the upper crews to brace the supports because the chamber would not hold if the void kept pressing. Victor, now no longer pretending, slammed the ring against the floor and tried to widen the crack, but the seal above him flared brighter. The living void pushed back, rising in a dark wave that bent the lantern light and filled the room with cold pressure. Kael stepped into that pressure, held his storm-marked chest guard tight, and planted his feet. He was afraid, and he did not hide that fear anymore, but he also knew that fear did not have to speak for him. He spoke the old words that Leela had found, simple words of binding and refusal, and the stone answered. The black ring split with a sharp crack and turned to dust in Victor's hand. The void screamed without sound, then snapped backward through the crack as the seal forced it down. Victor staggered and fell to one knee, not hurt beyond standing, but stripped of his control. Guards moved in and took him away before he could reach the stairs. The chamber settled, but the victory did not feel final. Kael knew that Victor had only been one hand holding the dark in place. The true hunger still lived below. In the silence after the clash, the last whisper returned one more time, softer now, almost like a promise. It called from deeper under Asterhold, not with anger, but with memory. Kael turned to Jonah, Leela, and Max, and he said what they had all begun to feel. The void knew their names now. That meant the next part of the fight would be more personal, more dangerous, and harder to hide from. Above them, the city kept repairing its walls. Below them, the seal still glowed. And in the space between those two worlds, Kael finally understood that protecting Asterhold would mean facing whatever the living darkness had learned about them, one name at a time. That night, the city did not sleep well, but it did not fall apart either. Workers kept stacking stone through the dark, Hazel kept counting the supplies, and Nora helped calm the children who had seen too much fear in one day. Eli stayed close to Kael because the boy believed Kael would listen when others would not. That trust mattered more than any speech. Leela and Jonah went back to the archive with the black ring dust sealed in a cloth jar, hoping it would reveal one last clue before it faded completely. Max remained at the chamber entrance, silent and watchful, his broad frame steady in the dim light. Kael stood alone for a moment near the repaired seal, and he felt the city around him breathing through stone and sorrow. He had begun the day thinking he must carry everything by himself, but now he understood the truth in a deeper way. Asterhold would survive only if its people stood together, told the truth, and refused to let fear name them first. Then a final detail caught his attention. In the dust left behind by the broken ring, there was a small carved mark, not a warning symbol, but a map sign pointing toward the old water tunnels beneath the eastern wall. Kael knelt and touched it, and his tired eyes narrowed with new focus. Someone or something had left a path for the next move. The seal was holding, Victor had been taken away, and the city had won one narrow step. Yet the living void had listened, learned, and answered back. Now it was guiding them toward something hidden deeper under Asterhold, and whatever waited there was linked to the whisper that only Kael had heard. He rose slowly, looked toward the dark tunnel, and made a quiet promise to himself and to the city. He would not let the darkness choose the story of their names, and when the next whisper came, he would be ready to answer it. The tunnel under Asterhold was cold, narrow, and full of old stone dust, and the air felt wrong in a way that made every breath slow and careful. Broken support beams leaned over the path like tired arms, and pale storm light from deep cracks in the wall gave the dark a thin blue edge. The city above was still alive, still wounded, and still fighting, but here below, the threat had changed. The living void was no longer just chasing them, it was guiding them. Kael stood at the front with his dark cloak held tight around his lean frame, his dark brown hair hanging near his sharp, tired eyes, and his storm-marked chest guard faintly catching the light. He had heard a whisper before, and that whisper had not sounded like a threat. It had sounded like a warning, or maybe a door left open by mistake. Max stood close behind him, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair, a rugged face, and the steady look of a man who would not leave anyone behind. Leela, with her red hair tied back and her ink-stained sleeves, kept one hand on her scroll satchel and the other on a stone wall, reading the marks as if they were a language written by fear itself. Jonah, gray-haired and careful, pushed his round glasses up his nose and studied the tunnel map he had pieced together from old records. Eli, small and sandy blonde-haired, stayed near Nora because the boy had learned that adults could be brave, but they could also disappear into danger too fast to catch. Nora, with brown hair, a weary posture, and rough gloves, kept her hand on Eli as if that touch alone could keep him steady. Behind them came Hazel, strong and stern, her dark hair tucked under a steel helmet, her heavy repair gear clanking softly as she walked. And beside her stood Victor, neat in his inspector coat with a silver clasp, his black hair smooth, his face calm, and his eyes too sharp for comfort. He had helped them on the surface, but no one had forgotten how often he looked at power as if it belonged to him first. The central problem was now plain to all of them. The void was moving toward something buried deeper below the city, and if it reached that thing first, Asterhold could be opened from the inside and swallowed by the dark. Worse still, Kael was the only one who could hear the whisper calling from ahead, which meant the city may have been trusting the one person the void had chosen to notice. No one liked that thought, but no one could deny it either. The path bent downward and the whisper returned, soft as breath against glass. Kael stopped, lifted one hand, and listened. This time the voice did not fade. It formed a shape in his mind, not with words he could fully trust, but with a clear direction. "Keep going, it is under the seal." Leela saw the change in his face and stepped closer. She wanted truth because truth was how she stayed alive, and because history mattered to her more than anyone in the group. She had spent years studying the buried city of Asterhold, trying to understand why its oldest chambers had been sealed away. Jonah wanted the same truth, but for another reason. He had served the city archives long enough to know that records were often broken on purpose, and that hidden facts usually protected someone powerful. Victor said nothing, yet the small pause in his breathing told the others he was also hearing the words, or at least guessing what they meant. That made him dangerous in a new way, because a man who guessed too much could still choose the wrong side. Hazel crouched beside a cracked support pillar and pressed her gloved hand over the stone. "There is hollow space ahead," she said in a low voice. "Big enough for a chamber, maybe bigger." She was the engineer of the city, a woman who trusted measured walls, old stone, and weak points, and she mattered because she could tell the group where the tunnel would fail before it failed on them. Max drew a slow breath and looked at Kael. He did not ask if Kael was sure, he asked if Kael was ready. That was different, and that was why Max mattered. He was not the loudest or the fastest, but he made room for courage in other people. Kael gave one sharp nod and they went on. The deeper they walked, the more the walls changed. The rough tunnel gave way to older stone blocks, then to carved terraces, then to half-buried arches with storm symbols cut into every surface. These were not random ruins. They were part of a sealed system built long ago to hold something back. Jonah stopped near a broken wall and brushed dust from a rune line. His eyes widened behind his glasses. "This is not only a prison," he said. "It is also a warning map." Leela turned to him at once, hungry for meaning. Jonah explained in simple words that the runes marked pressure paths, sound paths, and light paths, the ways a force could move through stone if someone fed it the right key. The city had not just been sealed, it had been taught how to stay shut. That was when the twist began to take shape. Victor had been too quiet for too long, and his hand kept drifting to the inside pocket of his coat. Eli noticed first because children often see fear before adults admit it. The boy stared at Victor and whispered to Nora that the man was hiding something round and dark. Nora tensed, and Max saw it at once. Before anyone could speak, Victor finally pulled out the black stone ring. It was small, plain, and heavy-looking, but the air around it seemed to sink when he held it. The others froze because every one of them felt the wrongness in that object at the same time. Victor raised his chin and said he had found it among the debris after the first collapse, that he had kept it safe, and that he had not yet decided who could be trusted with it. His words sounded neat, but his motive finally showed itself. He was not serving the city. He was studying how to control what was under it. He believed that if he could understand the ring, he could command the force guiding the void and use that power to make Asterhold obey again. He wanted order, but it was the kind of order that came from a hand clenched too hard around a blade. Leela demanded the ring at once, and Victor refused. The tension snapped through the group like a wire pulled too tight. The whisper in Kael's head suddenly sharpened, and he realized the worst part. The voice was not only leading them forward, it was responding to the ring itself. The living void had not simply learned their fear. It had learned the shape of the object that controlled its paths. That meant someone long before Victor had made a bargain with the dark and left a key behind. Kael stepped toward Victor and told him to hand it over. Victor did not move. Instead, he turned the ring in his fingers, and the shadows along the corridor thickened at once. The living void surged from a crack in the far wall, black smoke rolling low and fast, red glints pulsing deep inside it like eyes opening in layers. It struck the stone floor and split into tendrils that wrapped around broken pillars, ceiling beams, and the edges of the chamber ahead. Hazel shouted for everyone to move back, and Max shoved Eli and Nora toward cover behind a slab of fallen rock. Leela grabbed Jonah by the sleeve and dragged him out of the line of the spreading dark. Kael stayed facing the void because the whisper now had one clear message: do not let it reach the seal. The passage ahead opened into a vast underground chamber, and there, in the center of the far wall, stood the ancient storm seal. It was massive, glowing faintly white-blue, covered in fractured runes and storm symbols, and set deep into the stone like a heart locked in the body of the city. Its light flickered as the void neared it, and the air around the seal began to shake. Jonah stared in horror and told them what he had finally understood. The seal was not just holding back the void. It was also holding back a buried storm source, a force old enough to crush the chamber if it was forced open the wrong way. The black stone ring was the key that could unlock or break it. Victor had not brought them here by accident. He had been guided by greed, and the void had used that greed to come closer to its goal. That revelation changed everything. The void wanted the seal open because it could feed on the storm power behind it, spread through the city veins below, and turn Asterhold into a hollow shell. Victor wanted the same chamber because he believed he could seize that power before the dark did. Neither of them cared what it would do to the people above. Kael felt anger rise inside him, but he also felt something else. The whisper was no longer only a warning, it was a test. He had heard it because he was tied to the seal in some way that no one yet understood, and if he failed now, the city would pay the price. Max saw Kael move and fell in beside him without a word. Hazel pulled a wrench from her belt and shouted for everyone to keep the chamber supports stable. Leela and Jonah rushed to the rune panels on the side wall, trying to read the old instructions before the void touched them. Nora held Eli close, but the boy kept watching Kael with wide eyes because even frightened children know when a moment matters. Victor stepped toward the seal with the ring in his hand, and the living void wrapped around his arm like smoke seeking a candle flame. For 1 second it looked as if he might still win, not because he was strong, but because he had been willing to risk everything for control. Then Kael heard the whisper one last time, clear and close, like a voice speaking from just behind his ear. Trust the storm, not the dark. He looked at the seal, then at the ring, then at Victor, and he finally understood that the whisper had never wanted him to obey the void. It wanted him to choose the city, even if the choice hurt. Kael stepped into the chamber light, raised his marked chest guard toward the seal, and called for everyone to hold steady. The stone symbols answered with a low thunder sound, and the white-blue glow grew brighter across the fractured lines. The void recoiled, the floor shook, and Victor shouted in surprise as the ring slipped slightly in his hand. The chamber did not fully open, and the dark did not fully break back, but the first line of resistance was set. The ancient power under Asterhold had awakened, and the next moment would decide whether it became their shield or their ruin. Kael stood at the center of that choice, breathing hard, changed by the weight of it, no longer just a listener to the whisper, but its answer. And above them, far beyond the stone and dust, Asterhold kept trembling, waiting to see who would speak for its future next. The chamber under Asterhold felt alive with fear, and the broken stone around it trembled with every slow pulse from below. Pale light leaked from the ancient storm seal, and the glow made the old runes look sharp and angry. Kael stood in front of the seal with dust on his cloak, his dark brown hair falling over tired eyes, and his lean frame held still as if the whole room had placed its weight on his shoulders. Max stayed close behind him, broad and calm, with black hair, heavy guard clothing, and one hand ready near his belt. Leela watched from the side with her red hair tied back, her robe sleeves marked with ink, while Jonah, with gray hair and round glasses, leaned over his papers as if the answer might still be hidden in old lines. Eli, small and sandy blonde-haired, clung near Nora, who kept a steady hand on his shoulder. Hazel stood by the cracked wall in her steel helmet and heavy repair gear, and Victor remained near the far arch, neat and quiet, with black hair, a silver clasp on his coat, and eyes that hid too much. The central conflict was clear now. If the seal held, Asterhold might survive. If it failed, the living void would spread through the deep tunnels and rise toward the city above. Kael had changed in the last moments, and everyone could see it. Before, he had only listened to the whisper in the stone, unsure if it was warning him or calling him. Now he felt its answer inside him, strong and plain, like a hand reaching back when he had finally chosen to reach first. The voice in the seal did not speak in words anymore. It pushed a feeling into his chest, a simple truth that he could hold. Stand here, do not let it pass. So Kael lifted his head and said what no one else had yet dared to say: they would not run. They would not wait for the dark to choose for them. They would hold the line in this chamber until they knew what the seal wanted and what the city could still become. Max gave a short nod because he knew that calm courage mattered more than loud promises. Leela quickly opened one of her scrolls and pointed at the rune patterns, explaining that the seal was not a door that opened once and stayed open. It was a balance, and balance could be guided if the right symbols were fed with enough storm light. Jonah looked up and added that the old records spoke of a bond, not just a lock. The seal was built to answer to a willing keeper. That keeper had to remain steady while the power tested them. Hazel muttered that the stone could crack at any time, so she sent 2 workers to brace the side supports, while Nora pulled Eli farther back and tried to keep his breathing even. Victor listened to all of it with a careful face, but inside him the greed only sharpened. He had come to Asterhold because he had learned that the city rested on a sealed force older than the ruined towers above. He wanted that force broken in just the right way because the black relic he carried, the black stone ring, could guide the void through the cracks and let him control the panic that followed. He did not care if the city suffered. He cared that fear could make him powerful. That was why he had hidden his true purpose behind the role of a helpful inspector. Then the first shock hit. The black stone ring slipped free from Victor after a sudden tremor, and it rolled across the dust until it stopped near Kael and the seal. The room went silent for one hard breath. Leela saw the carved marks on the ring and froze because they matched the corrupted lines inside her oldest notes. Jonah looked sick with realization and said the ring was not just a relic. It was a guide stone made to steer the void toward an opening in the seal. Victor stepped forward at once, his calm face cracking for the first time. He said the ring had to be taken, but his voice was too quick, too sharp, and every person in the chamber understood that he was lying. This was the twist that changed everything. The apparent helper had been the danger all along, and the seal had not only been attacked from below, it had been hunted from within. Victor admitted enough to expose his motive without giving up control. He said Asterhold had been weak for too long, and weak places could be ruled if people were afraid enough. He wanted the void to spread just far enough to break the old guard, then he wanted to stand in the middle of the fear and offer order. His plan was cold and simple. He would guide the darkness, let the city tremble, and claim authority from the ruin. Hazel swore and moved to block the arch, while Max stepped in front of Nora and Eli. Leela shouted for Kael not to touch the ring with bare hands because the old runes could react badly to the wrong will. But Kael was already moving because the seal under him had begun to pulse faster, and the whisper inside him had turned into a clear warning. The void was waking because it had sensed the ring, and if it reached the chamber before the seal settled, the people above would lose their last safe ground. Kael bent down and did not grab the ring at once. Instead, he placed his palm against the stone floor and listened through the tremor. The seal answered him with a wave of cold light, and for one strange moment, he understood what the ancient builders had meant. They had not built the seal to shut the storm away forever. They had built it to hold the storm in place until a rightful voice could command it with balance instead of greed. That was why the chamber was trembling now. The seal had awakened because it had found someone who would answer without fear. Kael lifted the black stone ring only after the whisper in the stone told him where to place it. He slid it into a broken groove at the base of the seal, not to help the void, but to expose the path it had been using. The chamber flared with white-blue light, and the carved lines across the wall shot across the stone like veins of lightning. Victor shouted and lunged forward, but Max intercepted him with a hard shove that drove him back into a pile of broken stone. The clash was fierce but clean, more like a battle of wills than a battle of weapons. Hazel and her workers locked the braces in place as the ceiling shook. Nora pulled Eli behind a support column, and the boys stared wide-eyed at the bright storm line forming over Kael. Leela called out the pattern as it changed, because she could now read the seal in motion. Jonah, with shaking hands, confirmed that the hidden path was closing as long as the ring stayed trapped in the groove, but the living void did not give up. A thick wave of black smoke rose through the central crack, thin red glints burning deep inside it, and the chamber lights bent around it like they were afraid. The dark force had no face, but its hunger filled the room. It struck the seal with tendrils of shadow, trying to overwhelm the light and force the groove open again. Kael felt the pressure in his chest and almost stumbled, but then he remembered every voice that had pushed him to this point. Max had guarded people because he believed they mattered. Leela had searched old truths because she believed knowledge could still save lives. Jonah had preserved records because he believed the past could guide the future. Nora had protected Eli because she believed fear should not be the last thing a child learned. Hazel had held broken walls together because she believed even damaged places were worth repair. And now Kael understood that all of them had made the choice before him real. He was not standing there for himself alone. He was standing there because the city above was trembling, because the people below had nowhere else to go, and because the whisper had become trust. So Kael spoke back to the seal in a clear, steady voice, and he told it to hold. The stone answered with a deep ring that shook dust from the ceiling and pushed the living void back a full step. The white-blue light grew stronger, wrapping around the black smoke like cold fire. Victor tried one last time to break the moment by shouting that Kael would destroy everything, but no one listened anymore. The truth had already cut through his lies. Max forced Victor farther from the groove, Leela held her scroll high to guide the current, and Hazel shouted for every brace to stay locked. Then the ancient storm seal settled into a hard, steady pulse. It had not fully closed, it had not fully opened, but it had chosen a side. The void withdrew into the crack, forced to retreat for the moment, and the chamber fell into a stunned silence that felt almost holy. Kael remained standing at the center of it all, breathing hard, changed again, no longer only a listener to the whisper, but its answer. Yet even in that stillness, a new sound drifted down through the stone above them. It was faint, distant, and wrong, like another chamber waking somewhere deeper under Asterhold. Jonah heard it first. Leela saw the concern on his face and knew at once that the danger was not gone. The city had been saved from the first strike, but something older had answered the seal, and Victor, though driven back, was still alive, still dangerous, and still watching. Kael looked up into the trembling dark and understood that this was only the next step. Asterhold had chosen to trust him once, and now the real burden was to find out what else had been sleeping beneath the city all this time. The stone had spoken. The storm had listened. And somewhere below the broken streets, a deeper door had just begun to move. Asterhold shivered under a sky that no one could see because the city lay far below the broken streets and the sleeping towers above it. Dust drifted through narrow tunnels, pale light spilled across cracked stone, and the air felt cold enough to slow every breath. After the first strike against the seal, the whole underground city seemed to hold still, as if it knew something worse had just awakened. Kael stood near the ruined chamber wall, his dark brown hair damp with sweat, his sharp, tired eyes fixed on the crack in the stone, and his lean body held tight inside his dark cloak and storm-marked chest guard. He had not come here for glory, and he did not want power for himself. He wanted the city to survive because Asterhold had already trusted him once, and he knew that trust now carried the weight of every life above and below. Max stood beside him, tall and broad, with black hair and a rugged face that never showed panic. He wore his heavy guard cloak and leather armor like a wall, and he wanted only one thing: to keep the others safe while the danger grew. Leela, a woman with red hair and bright, focused eyes, adjusted the rolled cuffs of her historian robe and clutched her scroll satchel, because she wanted the truth more than comfort, and the truth was the only way to stop the ruin from spreading. Jonah, an older man with gray hair and round glasses, held his map tubes close with careful hands, and his quiet mind kept searching for the pattern behind the seal, because he knew old things always had old rules. Eli, a small boy with sandy blonde hair and a worried face, stayed near Nora, a woman with brown hair, a gentle face, and a weary posture, because he needed safety, and she needed to protect the child who had already seen too much. Hazel, a strong woman with dark hair under a steel helmet, stood in heavy repair gear with her gloves clenched tight, and she wanted the city systems restored before the next collapse came. All of them looked toward the chamber floor where the stone had begun to hum again. The central problem was now plain for everyone to see. The ancient storm seal had cracked, the deeper door beneath it had started to move, and if the thing below was freed, it could swallow the city in fear and chaos. Victor, the smooth-faced man with black hair and sharp eyes, had been driven back before, but he was still alive, still dangerous, and still watching from somewhere in the dark. He did not want the void for its own sake. He wanted control. He had studied the old seal and learned that the black stone ring could guide the living void like a hand on a leash, and if he could claim that force, he could use the panic of the city to place himself above every guard, scholar, and worker in Asterhold. That was why he waited, that was why he hid, and that was why the next step had already begun. The chamber lights flickered as the floor gave a low grinding sound, and all eyes turned to the seam that had opened in the stone. Kael moved first because he knew hesitation only gave fear more room. He knelt near the fracture, placed one hand against the rune-marked wall, and felt the cold pulse of the seal answer him in sharp waves. The storm inside the stone was not asleep anymore. It was listening. Leela rushed to his side and spread one of Jonah's maps across a broken pedestal, then pointed to a line of old marks that no one had noticed before. The seal was not just a lock, she explained in a quick, clear voice. It was a net built to hold back something that could slip through cracks and touch minds before bodies. That was the first twist, and it hit them hard. The danger was not only a monster in the dark. The danger was a force that could bend fear itself, making people doubt what they saw and turning friends against each other. Jonah nodded slowly, his glasses catching the pale light, and he revealed what he had feared but not yet said. Long ago, the builders of Asterhold had sealed the chamber because they had failed to destroy the black stone ring. They had hidden it instead, hoping no one would learn how to use it. But Victor had learned. Victor had found the ring. Victor had likely used it to wake the deeper door. Max cursed under his breath and tightened his grip on his bracer straps because now the enemy had both knowledge and motive. Hazel ordered 2 repair crews to clear the side tunnel, not because she believed the enemy was coming through that exact path, but because she knew a trapped city had to keep moving if it wanted to live. Nora pulled Eli closer, telling him to stay calm and stay with her, while Eli nodded with wide eyes and tried to be brave. Then the stone trembled again, harder this time, and a thin black mist slipped from the crack like smoke with a will of its own. It did not have a face, but it had a hunger. The living void was beginning to show itself. Kael felt the storm mark on his chest burn under his guard, and he realized that the seal was reacting to him as much as to the void. The ancient power wanted a choice, and it wanted it now. He remembered the first strike, the surge of light, and the way the darkness had answered from below. That memory did not bring comfort. It brought purpose. He stepped forward, raised his hand, and called for the storm to hold the breach for just a little longer. The chamber answered with a sharp burst of white-blue light, and the old runes along the wall flashed like waking eyes. The black mist recoiled, but it did not retreat for long. It stretched into thin tendrils that crawled over stone and reached for the weak places in the room, as if it wanted to learn the shape of every person there. Max moved to shield Leela and Jonah, while Hazel slammed a repair brace into a broken support beam and shouted for everyone to back away from the falling dust. The room shook, then settled, then shook again, and the sound of the deeper door moving below them became impossible to ignore. It was not a door of wood or iron. It was a great hidden barrier of stone and old magic, and it was turning with slow, patient force. Victor chose that moment to reveal himself, but only in part. His voice came first from the darkness beyond a side archway, smooth and calm, almost polite. He told them they were wasting time trying to protect a city that was already weak. He said the seal had always been an insult to the truth below it, and that the black stone ring had simply shown him how to correct an ancient mistake. He did not sound mad. He sounded certain, and that made him more dangerous. Victor believed the living void could be guided, not because he loved it, but because he loved control more than caution. He wanted the city to fear him, then depend on him, then obey him. That was his motive, plain and ugly, and everyone understood it at once. Kael answered him with steady words, saying that no one had the right to turn fear into a tool. Victor only laughed once, a small dry sound, and said that every city was built on fear, because fear kept people in line. Then he vanished back into the dark before anyone could reach him. Eli shivered and hid his face against Nora, and Nora looked like a mother who had already decided she would not let the child be taken by terror. Jonah opened a smaller scroll tube and found a hidden note folded inside an old city record. It was a second twist, and this one changed everything. The note was written by one of the original seal keepers, and it said the seal could not be held only by power. It had to be held by trust. The storm responded to a clear heart, and the void fed on doubt. That meant the city had not merely buried a monster, it had built a test. Kael looked at the others and understood the true burden. He would not win by force alone. He would have to hold his fear steady and ask the others to do the same. That was harder than any strike. So Kael lowered his hand, turned to his friends, and spoke with the calm of someone who had finally accepted what the city needed from him. He told Max to guard the left passage and protect the workers. He told Hazel to brace the cracked supports and keep the lower tunnel open for escape. He told Leela to read every mark on the wall and watch for changes in the runes. He told Jonah to search the records for the name of the seal keeper who had left the note. He told Nora to keep Eli close and speak to him because a steady voice could fight panic better than a blade. Then he placed both hands on the stone, drew one deep breath, and let the storm mark shine through the dark cloak. The chamber filled with pale light, and the living void surged again, angry now because the seal had found a stronger answer. The black mist slammed against the rune wall, pushed at the edges, and tried to slip through the spaces where doubt lived. For a moment it seemed the darkness might win because the deeper door below them turned another small step and the whole chamber groaned with strain. But the group held. Max stood firm like a barricade. Hazel kept the broken beam from collapsing. Leela called out each rune change as it happened. Jonah found the seal keeper name and read it aloud, which helped the old magic settle into a pattern. Nora soothed Eli until his shaking eased. And Kael, for the first time since this nightmare began, did not feel alone inside the storm. He felt the others beside him, and that changed the shape of his power. The white-blue light spread wider across the chamber floor, then climbed the fractured walls, then wrapped around the black mist like a net of lightning. The living void was not destroyed because it could not be destroyed so simply. Instead, it was forced back into the crack, pulled deeper, and held there for the moment. The room stopped shaking and a heavy silence fell over Asterhold, yet no one celebrated because the deeper door had not closed, it had only slowed. And somewhere below, Victor was still moving, still planning, and still waiting for a better chance. Kael looked into the dark opening at the center of the floor and felt a new truth settle inside him. He was no longer just the one who could call the storm. He was now the one who had to guide it, and he would need every ally if he was going to keep Asterhold from falling into the void below. The city had survived this step, but the path ahead had become much worse. Far beneath the broken streets, the hidden door continued to turn, and this time the sound it made was not just a warning, it was a promise. The broken heart of Asterhold still trembled in the cold dark, while dust drifted through the wide crack in the floor like slow gray snow. Below the shattered streets, old stone rooms waited in silence, and the air carried a strange hum that made every person feel the same fear. Kael stood near the opening, his dark brown hair falling across his tired eyes, and he felt the new truth inside him like a weight that would not leave. He was no longer just a young man who could call the storm. He was the one who had to guide it, shape it, and hold it steady when fear tried to tear it apart. That truth mattered because Asterhold was still hanging above the void, and if the hidden door below fully opened, the whole city could sink into nothing. Max stayed at Kael's side, tall and broad, with black hair, a heavy guard cloak, and a calm face that never hid his concern. He was the shield of the group, the man who wanted to keep everyone alive no matter how hard the path became. Leela, with her red hair, ink-stained sleeves, and sharp eyes, clutched her scroll satchel and stared at the crack like it could answer all her questions. Jonah, older and careful, with gray hair and round glasses, held his map tubes close and listened to the low turning sound below. Eli, the sandy blonde boy, stayed near Nora, and Nora, with brown hair and a tired but gentle face, kept one rough gloved hand on his shoulder so he would not panic. Hazel, the stern engineer with dark hair under her steel helmet, knelt beside broken stone and studied the floor with a hard, practical look. Victor stood a little apart from them all in his neat inspector coat with a silver clasp, black hair combed smooth, and sharp eyes that watched too closely. He said little, but his silence carried greed, because he wanted the power under Asterhold before anyone else could stop him. The living void did not speak in words. It waited in the deep as black smoke with thin tendrils and dim red glints pressing against the ancient seal like a patient thief. The danger was now clear to all of them. If the seal failed, the void would spread through the tunnels, collapse the support below the city, and take Asterhold with it. Kael did not move for a long breath because he could feel the city listening through the stone. Then he turned to the others and spoke with a steady voice that did not sound like the voice of a boy anymore. He said they could not fight this alone, and he needed every pair of hands and every clear mind. Max nodded at once because he already understood that the next battle would not be won by strength alone. Leela opened a scroll and showed the old drawings she had found in the archive chambers, where the ancient storm seal was first built by people who feared both flood and void. She explained that the seal was not only a wall. It was a lock, and the lock needed a proper pattern of storm energy to stay shut. Jonah pointed to one faded line on the map and said the builders had hidden a second control chamber deeper below, a place where the seal could be reinforced if the first ring failed. That was a useful answer, but it also made the stakes sharper because someone had reached that lower place before, and the marks on the map showed a break in the old path. Hazel checked the broken stones and found fresh tool marks along the floor edge, which proved that someone had been down there recently. Victor stepped forward then, acting as if he only wished to help, and he said the city could not waste time on suspicion. He claimed that the lower chamber was probably just a dead room, and that the fastest way to save Asterhold was to let him organize a controlled search. Kael heard the lie inside the words because Victor was too calm for a man facing disaster. Yet before Kael could challenge him, the stone under their feet groaned again, and a narrow ring of black light flickered around the edge of the opening. The living void had heard them, or perhaps it had simply grown bold. The weak glow of the ancient seal pulsed once, then twice, like a heart under strain. Eli let out a small gasp and Nora pulled him closer. This moment changed the plan. The city did not have time for fear or debate. They had to move now, or the void would keep testing the seal until it found the softest crack. So the group went down through a sloping tunnel carved from old stone and repaired in rough patches by later hands. Kael led the way with Max close beside him, while Hazel carried a lantern brace and Leela marked each turn with chalk so no one would be lost. Jonah followed with careful steps, muttering notes under his breath, and Nora kept Eli between her and the wall so the boy would not slip on loose rubble. The air grew colder with every step, and the sound of the hidden door turning became louder, though they could not yet see it. It was not a simple sound of wood or metal. It was a deep grinding pulse, as if the city itself had locked something away and that something had now learned how to push back. Along the tunnel walls, old storm symbols appeared in faded white stone, each one carved by hands that clearly expected disaster someday. Leela explained, in quick and clear words, that the ancient builders had feared exactly this problem. They had not sealed the void because it was weak. They had sealed it because it could learn, and if it learned the shape of fear, it could pull itself through cracks. Kael listened closely, and that explanation struck him harder than any attack could have. It meant the enemy below was not a mindless shadow. It had purpose. It wanted access, and it wanted people to panic so the seal would weaken under pressure. When the tunnel split, Hazel chose the path with stronger support beams, but Victor quietly insisted they take the older stair on the left. He said it was faster. Jonah noticed something hidden in the stair dust, a faint black powder that did not belong to stone. He bent down, touched it, and immediately pulled his hand back with a grim look. He said the powder matched the residue found on the black stone ring. At that name, Kael stopped. Leela looked at Victor at once, and Max shifted one hand near his weapon, not to attack, but to warn. Victor smiled a little, and that small smile became the first true reveal of his real intent. He had not come to help the city. He had come to find the ring and use it to guide the void. He admitted it in a smooth, cold voice, saying the city had been wasting a powerful force by locking it away. He believed the living void could be directed, controlled, and used to break every rival that stood in his way. He wanted Asterhold not as a home, but as a tool. That was why he had pushed so hard, and that was why he had stayed so close to the seal. His motive now made perfect sense, and it made him even more dangerous. He did not want destruction for its own sake. He wanted power that he could command. Before anyone could answer, the tunnel behind them shuddered and the black light spread across the floor like spilled ink. The living void began to press upward through a cracked seam, and the air filled with cold pressure that made every lantern shake. Kael did not have time to feel anger. He had to act. He stepped forward, planted his feet, and called the storm with both hands open, but this time he did not throw power wildly. He shaped it. He remembered the weight of the city, the fear of the people above, and the promise he had made to guide, not just strike. Blue-white light gathered around his arms in clean lines, then flowed outward in a controlled arc that wrapped the broken seam and held the black smoke back. Max moved at once to protect the others, bracing the rear as the pressure rose, while Hazel shouted for everyone to stay low and keep away from the walls. Leela and Jonah worked together fast, with Leela reading the old storm marks and Jonah matching them to his notes, until they found the pattern needed to reinforce the lower chamber. Eli, though scared, saw a loose latch on a side panel and called it out before anyone else could miss it, proving that even the smallest voice mattered. Nora pulled him into a safer spot and told him he had done well, which gave him the courage to keep watching. Victor tried to move past the group in the confusion, hoping to reach the deeper room first, but Max blocked him with a hard glare and a planted shoulder. Their clash was short, tense, and silent, and Victor was forced back before he could slip away. Then Hazel found the hidden panel Eli had noticed, and when she yanked it open, a narrow passage revealed itself behind the wall. Jonah looked inside and saw the lower control chamber at last, but he also saw something else. The chamber floor was already marked by fresh footprints, leading to a central pedestal where the black stone ring had been placed before. Yet the ring was gone now. That was the second twist, and it hit all of them at once. Victor had not brought the ring to the chamber. He had already hidden it somewhere below, and he had used the false search to keep everyone busy while the void weakened the seal from the inside. Kael felt the storm in his hands grow unstable, but he also felt something new settle deeper than fear. He now understood that being the guide meant more than leading the way forward. It meant reading the lies, trusting his allies, and choosing the right strike at the right time. He looked at Max, Layla, Jonah, Hazel, Eli, and Nora, and they all understood without speaking. They would go deeper. They would find the ring. They would face Victor again, and somewhere below that turning door, the living void was waiting, now more aware than ever, as the hidden path opened wider into the dark. The hidden door opened wider and cold air poured out of the dark like a warning. Below the broken stone floor of Asterhold, the next chamber waited in silence, and that silence felt wrong to everyone who stood there. Kael, a young man with dark brown hair, sharp, tired eyes, and a lean frame, kept his dark cloak tight around him as he watched the entrance ahead. He was the guide now, but he no longer thought that meant he needed to know every path. It meant he had to read people, hear fear, and choose when to move before the enemy could make the first mistake. Max, a tall man with black hair and broad shoulders, stayed close at Kael's side with calm eyes and a protective stance. Leela, a woman with red hair and bright, focused eyes, held her scroll satchel close, ready to name anything old that they found. Jonah, an older man with gray hair and round glasses, adjusted his papers and map tubes because he wanted the truth preserved before lies buried it. Hazel, a strong woman with dark hair and a steel helmet, checked the tools on her belt because broken systems and hidden locks were her kind of battle. Eli, a small boy with sandy blonde hair and a worried face, clung near Nora, a woman with brown hair and a gentle but tired look, because both of them had seen enough danger to know that every quiet moment could be a trap. All of them understood the danger without speaking because Victor was still somewhere below and the living void was now more aware than before. If they failed here, the ring could steer that darkness toward the heart of the city, and Asterhold would become a prison that never woke again. Kael led the team through the door first, and the chamber beyond spread out like a buried hall of stone and shadow. Broken pillars leaned from the floor, narrow walkways crossed over deep gaps, and old storm symbols glowed faintly on the walls like tired stars. In the center of the chamber stood a wide basin of dark metal, and around it lay cracked plates that had once belonged to the ancient storm seal. Leela moved closer and quickly explained that the seal had not simply blocked a tunnel, but had also held back a force that could pull shape from fear itself. She said the old builders had made the seal to protect Asterhold from a dark hunger that did not think like a person, did not tire like a person, and did not stop when it was fed. Jonah nodded and added that the seal only stayed strong if its broken parts stayed aligned, because the runes had to carry the storm light through every fracture at once. That was why Victor mattered so much. He had not only wanted the ring for profit or power, but because the ring could point the living void toward the weakest part of the seal. That was his motive, clear and cold. He wanted control over the chamber, control over the city, and control over whatever power came out if the seal finally failed. Kael felt anger rise in him, but he forced it down. Anger was useful only when it did not make a hand shake. He moved to the basin, studied the runes, and noticed a thin trail of black dust leading into a side arch. Victor had been here recently, and he had left that mark on purpose. He wanted them to see the path because he wanted them to follow it. Hazel crouched beside the basin and opened a panel in the floor with quick, practiced hands. Inside, she found old gear shafts and a set of bent support pins, which meant someone had forced the machinery of the chamber to open too fast. She looked up and told the others that the stone door above them could fail if the chamber shifted too hard. That raised the stakes again because if the chamber collapsed, they would lose the way back and trap themselves with the void below. Nora pulled Eli closer and told him to stay beside her and breathe slowly, while Max moved to the rear and checked every shadowed corner. Then Leela found another clue. Hidden under the edge of the basin was a second mark, a small circle cut into the stone, and inside it was the same pattern that had appeared near Victor before. It was a guide mark and not a prison mark. That meant the ring was not just a relic Victor had stolen. It was a key, and he had been using it to steer the living void along a route only he understood. Kael felt the truth settle into place, and the revelation changed everything. Victor had never wanted to escape the darkness. He had wanted to aim it. The team had assumed they were chasing a thief with a relic, but now they saw a man who was trying to become the hand that held a monster on a chain. That kind of greed was worse than simple fear, because it could hide behind a calm face and polite words. Before anyone could speak again, a low sound rolled through the chamber, like a deep breath taken by the walls themselves. The living void stirred below them, and the black smoke at the far end of the hall thickened into twisting tendrils that brushed the stone. Dim red glints flashed inside the dark, and the light from the seal flickered as if something huge had noticed them. Eli let out a small gasp, but Nora covered his hand with her own and kept him steady. Max stepped in front of them, broad shoulders firm, while Hazel grabbed a metal brace and jammed it into a crack in the floor to stop the nearest platform from shifting. Kael saw Victor then standing on a higher ledge across the chamber in a neat inspector coat with a silver clasp, black hair smooth and eyes sharp with cold control. He did not look worried. He looked satisfied, as if all of this had been arranged exactly as he wanted. In one hand he held the black stone ring, and the ring seemed heavier than a normal object should be, as if it carried a dead weight in the air around it. Victor called down that they were too late, that the void had already learned the way, and that the seal would fail whether they helped it or not. He said the city had always been weak, and weak things should be shaped by stronger hands. Kael understood then that Victor was not simply a greedy man. He wanted to prove that rules only mattered to people who were too afraid to break them. He believed he could command the dark and survive it. That belief made him dangerous because he would sacrifice everyone else to test it. Kael did not rush forward. He remembered the lesson from before, the lesson that being a guide meant choosing the right strike at the right time. He watched Victor instead, and he watched the way the ring pulsed when the void moved. Each pulse made the smoke bend toward one broken section of the seal, and each bend showed where Victor intended to open the path next. Kael spoke quietly to the others, and his voice stayed even. He told Max to hold the rear line, Hazel to brace the left platform, Leela to read the rune pattern on the basin, Jonah to match the old map lines with the chamber marks, and Nora to keep Eli hidden behind the lower wall. Then Kael took one step at a time toward the center, not because he was reckless, but because he had finally learned that courage could be calm. Victor laughed and said Kael still did not understand because the seal was already broken enough to bend. Kael answered that broken did not mean lost, and that was when the first real clash began. The living void surged upward in a thick wave, black smoke slamming against the stone and forcing loose dust into the air. Max drove forward to shield the group, Hazel slammed her brace into place, and Leela shouted that the storm symbols were still alive if they were aligned. Jonah found the correct mark on the basin and called out the missing line. Kael saw the pattern at last. The seal could be awakened by turning the chamber into a circle of light, but only if the ring was forced away from the center before the void fully gathered. That was the opening. That was the strike. Kael launched himself across the stone floor toward Victor while the chamber shuddered, the smoke rose higher, and the hidden path below them opened wider into the dark, leaving the next move hanging in the air like a promise. The hidden chamber beneath Asterhold shook like a living thing, and dust drifted through the blue-white light that still clung to the old stone walls. Broken pillars stood around the room like tired guards, and the narrow walkways above the floor gave everyone only a few safe steps before the ground dropped into deep dark gaps. Kael stood in the middle of that storm of stone and light, with his dark cloak snapping behind him and his tired eyes locked on Victor, because the truth was now clear. Victor had not simply come here to watch the seal fail. Victor had come to guide the living void, break the old protection, and take whatever power waited below the chamber before anyone else could stop him. If the seal fell all the way, the void could flood through the underground tunnels and reach the ruined city above, where Eli, Nora, and the rest of the trapped people still waited for hope. Kael launched himself across the stone floor with every bit of strength his lean body had left. He moved fast, low, and hard, with the storm-marked chest guard catching flashes of cold light as he crossed the chamber. Victor saw the charge coming, and his sharp eyes narrowed with calm greed, because he had expected resistance and still believed he could control the moment. He wore his neat inspector coat with the silver clasp, but the careful look on his face now hid something cruel and desperate. He had spent years studying the old chamber, learning the weak points, and placing the tiny guide marks that would pull the void into the right shape. His goal was simple and ugly. He wanted the power inside the seal, not for the city, but for himself. He believed he could use the ancient force as a weapon, and that belief made him dangerous in a very human way because he was not mad. He was certain. Behind him, the black stone ring sat near the center of the chamber, dull and heavy, while smoke from the living void rose in slow black waves that bent the light around it. On the upper ledge, Max moved at once because he was the one who never waited when danger struck. He was a tall man with black hair, broad shoulders, and a rugged face that looked carved by hard work and hard choices. His heavy guard cloak hung over leather armor and bracers, and his hands were already reaching for the nearest support beam as the chamber trembled. Max had always acted like a shield for the others, and that was what he wanted most now. He wanted to keep Kael alive long enough to finish the seal, and he wanted to keep the others from panicking as the floor groaned under their feet. Beside him, Leela stood with her red hair tied back and her sleeves marked with ink, her historian robe dusted gray from the ruin. Her eyes stayed fixed on the old rune lines because she understood the seal better than anyone else in the room. She had studied old records for years, and she mattered now because she could see the meaning in the pattern before the others could. Jonah, the older man with gray hair, round glasses, and careful hands, clutched a bundle of map tubes against his coat and shouted for everyone to hold their place. He had spent his life preserving knowledge, and now that calm wisdom was the reason the group did not break apart. Even Eli, the young boy with sandy blonde hair and a small worried face, stayed near Nora because the two of them had survived too much already to let fear own them now. Nora, with her brown hair, rough gloves, and weary posture, kept one hand on Eli and one eye on the path below because she knew that protecting the child mattered as much as fighting the enemy. Then the chamber changed again. The living void rolled forward in a thick cloud of black smoke, and within that smoke, dim red glints flashed like eyes in the dark. It did not have a human body, only tendrils that stretched and curled toward the runes in the floor. It moved the way smoke moves in a closed room, silent and patient, pressing into every crack it could find. Its power was not random. It had been guided. That was the secret Victor had used from the start, because the void did not simply hunt light. It followed weakness, and the guide marks had been carved to lead it there. The old seal was not broken all at once. It was being leaned on, line by line, until the whole chamber could no longer hold. Leela realized that Victor had chosen this room because the ancient storm seal could still awaken if the right circle of light was made around the storm mark basin. But the black stone ring had to be forced away from the center first, before the void gathered in full and locked the chamber into darkness forever. She shouted the warning across the noise, and Jonah turned the papers in his hands until one old diagram matched the lines under their feet. The chamber was not just a trap. It was a machine of light and pressure, built to push back a force like this if someone was brave enough to complete the pattern. Kael reached Victor just as the room lurched again, and the two of them collided in a hard clash of motion and intent. Victor stepped back, not in fear but in control, and he lifted one hand as if he were still directing a room full of workers instead of standing inside a collapsing seal chamber. He spoke with a cold voice, saying that Kael still did not understand the truth. The city above was already broken, the tunnels were already old, and the people of Asterhold would only survive if someone took control of the power beneath them. He claimed the seal had been built by frightened men who had hidden strength away instead of using it. He said his work with the guide marks was not betrayal, but correction. That was his motive, and it made him more threatening because he truly believed he was the only person willing to act without hesitation. Kael did not answer with words. He drove forward again, shoulders tight, jaw set, and eyes full of the same fierce promise that had carried him through every part of the descent. He had changed since this all began. He was no longer just chasing a mystery or trying to prove himself. He was fighting for the others now, and that made every step stronger. Max shouted from above that the left mark was flaring. Hazel, the strong woman with dark hair, a steel helmet, and heavy repair gear, appeared through the shaking haze near the wall ladder, and she slammed a wrench into a cracked support brace to keep the walkway from folding. Her loud voice cut through the room as she ordered everyone back from the edge, because she knew the chamber structure better than anyone else left alive in Asterhold. Her work mattered because the chamber was starting to tear apart at the seams, and if the support failed, no one would reach the basin in time. Then came the twist that changed the shape of the fight. Jonah looked down at one of the papers Victor had dropped in the struggle, and his careful hands began to shake. The guide marks were not only steering the living void toward weakness. They were also hiding an older line beneath them, a lost warning left by the builders of the seal. Jonah read it aloud in a broken voice, and the whole group heard the truth at once. The original seal had not been built to imprison the void forever. It had been built to hold it until a person with enough will could turn the chamber into a circle of stormlight and send the force back into the depths below the city, where it could no longer guide itself upward. That meant the old builders had expected betrayal. They had planned for someone like Victor. They had also hidden one final part of the answer in the floor near the basin. Kael saw it at the same moment Leela did, a faint circular mark cut into the stone, almost erased by age and black dust. It was not a guide mark. It was the true start line for the full seal. The chamber was telling them how to win, but only if they moved now. Kael heard the warning, and for the first time in the battle, he stopped trying to overpower Victor and started trying to outthink him. He twisted his body at the last second, forced Victor off balance, and drove him toward the side of the chamber where the ring of light could begin to form. Victor fought back with sudden fury, throwing his weight into the clash and trying to pull Kael into the dark smoke near the center. The living void surged in answer, its tendrils racing over the floor as if the force itself could feel the hidden path below widening into a mouth. Eli cried out when one tendril brushed close to the ledge, and Nora pulled him back with both arms, her face pale but steady. Max jumped down to the lower terrace and planted his boots hard, using his full strength to block a collapse near the walkway. Hazel shouted that the east support was failing fast. Leela ran to the basin and dragged one cracked metal plate into place, because she understood that every small act now mattered as much as any grand strike. The chamber was becoming a living storm of movement, sound, and fading light. At the same time, Victor made his final mistake. He revealed that he did not care if the city above survived after all. He wanted the chamber to fall open just enough to claim the power first, even if the void spread farther afterward. He had always planned to use the panic of the ruined city, the fear of the hidden tunnels, and the hunger of desperate people to give himself control. That truth hit Kael harder than the earlier lies because it showed the real shape of the enemy. Victor was not serving order, he was feeding on ruin. Kael felt that truth settle in his chest, and it changed him completely. He no longer fought only with anger, he fought with purpose. He shifted his stance, took one hard breath, and drove Victor back toward the stone ring with a clean and desperate move. The black ring skidded across the floor, sliding away from the center just enough to break the void's hold for a heartbeat. The storm seal answered at once. Pale white-blue lines flared under the basin, and the chamber filled with a sudden circle of light that pushed into the smoke and forced it to recoil. The living void surged, thrashed, and was driven back toward the widening dark below. The path under the chamber still yawned open, and the battle was not over yet, but for the first time the old seal had begun to wake. Kael stood in the flashing light, breathing hard, with his allies beside him and Victor staggering in shock, while the next move waited in the broken dark below. Chamber under Asterhold shook with a deep and uneven roar, and the new light still flashed across the broken stone. Dust drifted through the air like gray rain, while the wide basin in the floor glowed with a pale blue fire that had not lived for ages. Kael stood near the edge of the light, his dark cloak pulled tight around him, his tired eyes fixed on the open path below. Max stood at his side, broad and steady, ready to shield anyone who stumbled. Leela clutched her scroll satchel with both hands, her red hair tied back and her sharp eyes tracking every moving shadow. Jonah pressed one careful hand against the wall, his gray hair wet with dust, his round glasses reflecting the seal light. Eli stayed close to Nora, his sandy blonde hair falling over his worried face, while Nora kept one arm around him as if she could hold the whole world still. Victor, with his neat coat and cold black hair, staggered back from the blast of light, and for one short moment, every person in the chamber could see that he had not expected the seal to wake this fast. The danger was now clear to all of them. The living void had not simply found the chamber by chance, and Victor had not been trapped here by accident. He had been guiding the dark force with secret marks cut into the floor, using the guide mark to lead it toward weak places in the old barrier. He wanted the seal to crack open wide enough for him to take control of the power inside, because he believed the ancient storm force could make him untouchable. He wanted influence, command, and the kind of power that could bend the city to his will. If he failed, the living void would spill farther down into the city and then spread into the tunnels, the streets, and the homes above. Everyone in Asterhold would be lost in fear, and the ruined city would become a hollow shell under a dark sky forever. Kael understood this at once, and that understanding hardened his face. He did not just need to fight a monster. He needed to stop a man who had chosen greed over every life in the city. Below the chamber floor, the open path breathed out a colder darkness, and the living void gathered itself there like a storm with no sky. Its black smoke-like body twisted and stretched, and thin tendrils reached up toward the light before snapping back. The old storm symbols on the walls brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, as if the chamber itself was trying to remember how to protect the city. Leela stepped closer to Jonah and pointed at the carved lines around the basin. She saw that the storm marks were not random, and Jonah quickly agreed. He had spent years reading old records, and he knew the seal had been made to respond only when all its marks were aligned. The broken basin in the center was part of that pattern, but it could not work alone. Someone had to restore the order of the marks, and someone had to stand in the right place when the light rose. Max tightened his jaw and looked at Kael, while Hazel, the strong engineer with her steel helmet and heavy repair gear, pushed through the dust from the broken side passage. She had fought her way back with soot on her gloves and a fierce glare in her eyes, and she brought more bad news. The lower chamber supports were cracking. If the fight dragged on too long, the whole place could start to collapse in sections. That meant the team had only a short window to act before the seal, the chamber, and their escape all became part of the same falling ruin. Victor recovered first, and his sharp eyes turned from fear to anger in a single breath. He had failed to stay hidden, and now he tried to turn the moment in his favor. He shouted that the seal was unstable and that the only safe choice was to use the black stone ring he carried. That small relic, dark and polished and heavy in his palm, was the tool he had used to guide the void. He claimed it could also control the seal, and he urged Kael to trust him one last time, but Leela saw the ring and understood the truth before anyone else did. The ring was not a key to safety. It was a chain. The carved marks on its surface matched the guide mark on the floor, which meant Victor had not been studying the chamber to protect it. He had been mapping it to steer the darkness like a driver steering a cart. Nora pulled Eli farther back when Victor moved, and Eli stared at the ring with wide eyes, knowing at last that the polite inspector had been lying from the start. Victor needed the seal to open, because the living void obeyed paths, and he had planned to ride that path straight into the chamber heart before anyone could stop him. That was the twist none of them had seen clearly enough earlier, and now it landed with full force. The man they had argued with, followed, and nearly trusted had not simply been greedy. He had been building a trap for everyone, including himself, because he believed he could direct a force that no human should ever command. Kael did not answer with fear. He looked down into the widening dark, then at the glowing basin, then at the people beside him. He saw their exhaustion, their dirt, and their trust. He saw how each of them had stayed close even after so many hard turns. That changed something inside him. In the beginning of this journey, he had wanted only to solve the mystery and keep moving. Now he understood that the seal was not just a puzzle from the past. It was a promise to the people living above the ruins. He stepped forward and told Max to guard the left side, Hazel to brace the cracked support wall, Leela to read the storm lines, Jonah to guide the pattern from the records in his head, and Nora to keep Eli safe near the light. His voice stayed calm, but every word carried new weight. Max nodded at once, because he trusted Kael now not just as a fighter, but as a leader. Hazel slammed her repair gear against the wall and began locking broken braces into place. Jonah, with careful hands and a thoughtful face, spoke the old sequence of mark positions from memory. Leela traced the symbols with one finger and called out the next placement. Nora held Eli close and whispered that he was brave for staying still. Eli did not look brave, but he did stay still. That mattered too. Then Kael crossed the edge of the basin and stepped into the flashing light. The glow climbed over his dark cloak and storm-marked chest guard, turning him into a sharp shape against the smoke. The living void rose in answer, angry and confused, and its tendrils struck toward him from the lower path. Max moved first, planting himself in front of Kael to block the worst of the strike. The force slammed against Max like a burst of cold wind, but he held his ground. Hazel shouted for everyone to brace as one of the support beams cracked overhead. Leela called out the last missing mark, and Jonah pointed to the correct angle with a shaking hand. Kael understood at once that the seal did not want strength alone, it wanted alignment. It wanted someone to stand where the storm symbols met the basin light. So he shifted one step to the side, then another, until the glowing lines ran cleanly through the carved rings on the floor. The chamber answered him with a sudden surge of white-blue light, and the old seal spoke in a low rumble through stone and metal alike. The void recoiled again, driven back toward the dark opening below, but not yet broken. Victor saw the change and tried to rush forward, shouting that they were all wasting their chance. He lifted the black stone ring as if he still owned the chamber, but the ring had begun to shake in his hand, and the guide mark around his feet cracked apart. The seal no longer accepted his control. For a short and startling moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Then the floor under Victor split with a hard stone crack, and he stumbled sideways as the light cut away his path. He did not fall into the dark, but he lost the advantage he had been hunting for so long. Kael saw him clearly then, not as a mystery, but as a man who had gambled everything and was now trapped inside his own design. Victor reached for the wall, but the stone there was already glowing against his fingers, and even he seemed shocked by how completely the chamber had turned away from him. The living void, now forced back by the waking seal, struck one last time at the weakest open edge beneath the basin. The impact sent a wave through the chamber, and dust rolled from the ceiling in thick clouds. Hazel shouted that the supports were failing faster now. Jonah shouted that the second alignment was incomplete. Leela, breathing hard, realized the chamber still needed one more restored mark before the seal could close the lower path fully. Kael turned toward the dark opening below, and for the first time he saw not just a threat, but a root. Somewhere under the chamber, hidden in the broken depth, was the next piece of the old storm pattern. If they could reach it, the seal might lock the void away for good. If they failed, the dark would keep rising. Kael tightened his hand around the edge of the basin, looked once at his allies, and then stared into the broken dark below, ready to lead them onward even as the chamber shuddered around them. The chamber below Asterhold trembled like a frightened heart, and every broken stone seemed ready to slip away into the dark. Pale blue light from the ancient storm seal flickered across the ruined walls, then vanished, then returned in weak pulses that made the dust look alive. Kael stood at the edge of the storm-marked basin with his dark cloak hanging close around him, while Max kept one hand near the child Eli, and Leela clutched her scroll satchel against her chest. Jonah leaned forward with careful eyes, Nora stood beside Hazel with a worried but steady face, and all of them knew the same hard truth. If they did not reach the hidden piece below, the void would keep climbing through Asterhold, and every safe place above could soon become a place of fear. Kael did not speak at first because he was listening to the sound under the floor. Deep below the basin, a low and uneven hum moved through the stone, and that hum matched the old storm symbols carved into the chamber. Leela was the first to understand what it meant. She lowered one rolled page, pointed to a torn drawing, and said that the old seal was not one ring but several parts joined across different layers of the city. Jonah nodded slowly and explained that the builders had buried each piece in a separate depth so no single break could destroy the whole pattern. Hazel frowned at that because she had spent years fixing broken tunnels, and she understood how dangerous hidden layers could be. The city was not just ruined above ground, it was hollow in places below, and one bad step could send a whole path crashing down. Then the chamber gave a hard shake, and the black smoke of the living void pushed through a crack near the far wall. It did not enter like a person. It slid and curled, thin and patient, with dim red glints buried inside its dark mass. The sight made Eli step back in fear, and Nora quickly moved closer to him with both hands ready to steady him. Max stepped in front of them at once, broad shoulders squared, calm but ready. Victor appeared near the edge of the chamber walkway with his neat coat and his sharp, careful eyes, acting as if he had only just arrived, but Kael saw the small black stone ring on Victor's finger, and he knew that the inspector was not lost at all. Victor had been guiding the void by placing hidden guide marks in the floor, and now the enemy was arriving exactly where Victor wanted it to arrive. That truth hit harder than the shaking floor. Jonah looked down at the marks near the basin, and his face changed with quiet anger. He had seen those same simple ring shapes in old records, but he had never connected them to sabotage. Leela quickly put the pieces together and said that Victor was using the void line in the chamber to push the living void toward the weakest part of the seal. He wanted the seal to crack open wide enough for him to control what came out next. He did not want simple ruin. He wanted the power after the ruin because greedy men always think they can hold darkness in one hand without being burned by it. Kael stared at Victor and saw the answer in the inspector's calm posture. Victor was not afraid of the void, he was using it. Victor smiled as if the chamber belonged to him. He said the city needed a strong hand, and he said the old seal had always been a prison built by weak rulers who feared true power. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were bright with hunger. He wanted the storm pattern broken because he believed the energy below Asterhold could make him untouchable. The living void answered him at once, twisting toward the guide mark he had hidden in the floor, as if it had followed his silent command for days. Kael understood then why every attack had seemed too well timed, why the void had always found the next crack, and why the enemy had never struck in a direct way. Victor had been making the path for it all along. Kael did not let the shock stop him. He tightened his grip on the basin edge, looked at his allies, and gave one clear order. Max moved to shield Nora and Eli, while Hazel dropped to one knee beside a cracked walkway and began checking the support stones with fast, practiced hands. Leela and Jonah searched the floor for the real hidden route, and Kael followed the low storm hum through the chamber. The path down was not a staircase, but a broken slope of half-fallen stone and narrow ledges that dropped into a deeper blue glow. Every few steps the air changed, becoming colder and heavier, like the breath of a sealed room that had not been opened in years. Dust drifted up from below, and the walls carried more storm symbols, each one faintly pulsing as if waiting to be awakened. The first hard test came at a narrow bridge of stone that crossed a black gap. It looked thin enough to snap under a single rushed step, and the living void pressed close behind them, making the shadows move wrong. Hazel said the bridge had to be crossed in the right order or the whole thing could collapse. Jonah checked the old markings and saw 3 small signs worn into the edge stones. Leela realized they were timing marks made to guide people through the chamber when the storm pattern was still active. Kael stepped first, slow and careful, then Max followed with Eli near the middle and Nora behind him with a hand on the boy's shoulder. Hazel and Jonah moved after them, and Leela came last, watching the signs while the void stretched across the gap like a dark tide trying to grab the bridge before they were all safe across. Halfway over, Victor tried to cut them off. He raised the black stone ring, and the guide marks in the floor answered with a dull, ugly pulse. A wave of pressure rolled through the chamber, and loose rock shook free from the ledges above. One side of the bridge cracked with a harsh sound, forcing the group to move faster. Kael saw Victor standing in the dim light, no longer pretending to help and now openly trying to overwhelm them. Max drove forward with a hard shove of his shoulder and forced one falling slab aside long enough for Nora and Eli to pass. Hazel slammed a brace into a split joint and kept the bridge from slipping apart. Leela shouted the next correct step from the markings, and Jonah pulled a hanging map tube from his coat to use as a support under one weak stone. It was not graceful, but it held. They crossed because they trusted one another more than they feared the dark. At the far side, the route opened into a smaller chamber with a round floor and a ring of storm carvings. In the center stood a narrow metal pillar with a missing socket, and Kael knew at once that this was where the next piece of the old pattern belonged. The air here felt different, almost quiet, as if the room had been waiting for the right hands. Leela whispered that the missing piece was called a storm key in the old notes, and Jonah confirmed that it fit into the seal only when the earlier layers were already awake. Kael stepped toward the pillar, but then he saw something that made him stop. The missing socket was not empty by accident. There was a second set of guide marks beside it, and those marks pointed not to the socket but to a deeper shaft in the floor. Someone had prepared a second route long before this night, and it led even lower than they had thought. That was the twist, and it changed everything. Kael had believed they were chasing the last piece of the pattern, but the chamber showed them a worse truth. The next piece was not only a key. It was also a lock on a hidden lower seal, one that held the deepest part of the void in place. If they took the piece without understanding the lower shaft, they might save one level and break another. Victor had known this. That was why he had been guiding them here instead of simply trying to stop them. He wanted them to open the wrong layer so the power below could spill out in a form he could claim. Kael felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders, but he also felt something new. He was no longer only a boy following warnings. He was the one who had to choose the right path for everyone behind him. Before he could move, the chamber shook again, and a distant boom rolled up from the lower shaft. Dust poured from the seams in the floor, and the ring carvings flashed pale blue for one sharp moment. The living void surged into the open room behind them, drawn by the pulse of the hidden seal. Victor lifted his hand and spoke with cold certainty, telling the void to break the chamber wide and bring the deeper power into reach. But the dark force did not fully obey him anymore. The storm symbols in the walls were waking, and the room was beginning to answer Kael instead of Victor. Kael looked at Max, then at Leela and Jonah, then at Eli and Nora and Hazel, and he understood that the next step would decide more than one battle. It would decide whether they sealed the darkness away or whether they opened a wound too deep to close. So Kael placed one hand on the storm pillar, leaned toward the hidden shaft, and took a slow breath as the chamber shuddered harder than before, ready to lead them into the next dark level below. The chamber of Asterhold shook under Kael like a living thing, and dust fell from every broken pillar. Below the hidden shaft, pale storm light flickered across the stone, while the living void hissed from the dark below. Kael stood at the edge, a young man with dark brown hair, tired sharp eyes, and a storm-marked chest guard, and he knew this was the last safe moment before everything changed. Max stepped beside him, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair and a protective stare that never left the shaft. Leela, the red-haired scholar, clutched her scrolls and studied the runes, because she knew the seal could only hold if the old marks were aligned. Jonah, gray-haired and careful, adjusted his glasses and finally understood the hidden truth. Victor had not been guiding them to save Asterhold. He had been using the guide mark and the black stone ring to weaken the seal, so he could claim the power below for himself. Victor raised his polished hand and smiled, but his calm face could not hide his greed. He admitted that the storm seal had always kept a great force buried, and he wanted that force before the city leaders could lock it away forever. Hazel, the strong engineer with dark hair and a steel helmet, snapped that his plan would wreck the whole chamber. Eli, the small sandy blonde boy, pulled close to Nora, the weary brown-haired mother figure, as the ground trembled harder and the void tendrils began to climb the walls. Kael did not answer with anger this time. He looked at Max, then at Leela, Jonah, Eli, Nora, and Hazel, and he saw that they were waiting for him to choose who he would be. He set both hands on the storm pillar, felt its cold pulse, and called for everyone to place their marks on the basin. Together they shifted the stone rings, and the ancient storm seal blazed bright blue-white, driving the living void back into the depths. Victor tried to hold the black stone ring toward the breach, but the void turned on him first, and his own trick failed before the others. The chamber sealed with a deep thunder crack, the hidden shaft closed, and the darkness was forced into silence. Kael watched the last glow fade, and he finally understood that strength was not only about power. It was about trusting others, sharing the burden, and standing together when fear said to run.